Good afternoon and welcome to Geneva. This is part of an FMG, that's Friends of Multilateralism, interviews for our guests in Geneva on the occasion of MC12. FMG is a group of international trade experts who promote multilateralism, representative of different parts of the world, and our activities are mainly focused on negotiating and briefing experts and policymakers, as well as civil society and the private sector on various issues taking place in the WTO. Today, for this interview, we have Pascal KERNEIS, the Executive Director of the European Services Forum, which is the organization that represents the European services industries. Welcome, Pascal. It's very nice, and thank you for making the time to be with us. What we want to hear from you, first of all, is what are the issues that you look at as of most interest to you within what's on the table now at MC12?
Thank you, Hamid, and hello everyone. So yes, we came here with high expectation for MC12. There are, I would say, three issues for us of great interest into these negotiations. I will start with the less important one in the sense that they are not critical. One is there is a specific text on the importance of trade in services, which has been tabled by some countries like Australia and Switzerland, etc. And there the idea is to have, noting the possibility one day to start again the market access negotiations through the Council for Trade and Services special sessions. But unfortunately the text which is now tabled for the Ministerial has been diminished and only taken note of the importance of trade in services, which is better than nothing, because indeed trade in services is nearly a third of the world trade in terms of balance of payment. But we are disappointed that we think it is a missed opportunity. It was only to have the possibility to explore, so it was not asking for so much, so we're a bit disappointed with the substance of that one. There is another part where services is mentioned in the MC12 tabled text. That is the one related to the pandemic. And we in the European Services Forum already sent a position paper last year arguing that if you want to do a WTO decision or declaration on the importance of fighting the next pandemic, you can have the best TRIPS waiver, you can have the reduction of tariff on medicine and medical goods related to fighting a pandemic. If you do not have the possibility to cover essential services, which is logistic services, transport services like maritime, air transport, etc., you're going to miss the point, because during the peak of the pandemic of COVID-19, what has really stopped the products, it's not because they were blocked at the border because of the tariff, but because they were blocked at the border because the truck and the plane and the ships couldn't cross the border, or the custom officials were not there. So there is a need to work on this in the future. This is still in the text, and we hope that is going to remain there for the roadmap preparing the next pandemic. So that is the second part. But the real reason why I'm here is to make sure that the ministers are going to adopt a decision to extend the moratorium on custom duties on electricity transmissions, together with the extension of the e-commerce program. This is really, really important for us, because we fear that otherwise the WTO will do exactly the reverse of what it has been invented for, i.e. would allow raising tariff, a new tariff, and in particular raising tariff on services, on digital services at least, which means that it's going to be a new era, a completely uncharted territory, and that is of great concern to us.
Well, I can see exactly where you're coming from on the three items you mentioned, and we will see what comes out on the three of them. But as you rightly said, perhaps on the first two, the level of ambition is not what you have aspired for. A second question that I would like to hear your views on is what lies beyond MC12? Now, the question of WTO reform has been talked about for years now, and it's been discussed in various forums, but not yet discussed in a structured way in the WTO. And I'd like to hear your views about not the need for WTO reform, because this is recognized, but about how to start a structured discussion on WTO reform, and whether, if we don't reach an agreement multilaterally, i.e. an agreement by 164 members, what would be your views on launching a discussion on WTO reform among like-minded members? Of course, to be open to anyone who wants to participate, but not necessarily subject to a stamp by the 164.
Well, I mean, of course, WTO reform is necessary. Why? Because WTO is not like any other United Nations organizations. It has a binding set of rules, and these rules were governed by a dispute settlement system, which was making the process going on. And we must say most of the countries do respect their obligations, and we're respecting the decision of the panels in the WTO. Unfortunately, with the American previous mandate, it has not been, but already before we knew that they were not happy with the system. It was not possible to continue to have the nomination of the appellate body members, and therefore at this time the process has been stopped. So restoring the dispute settlement system is a must. This is a jewel on the crown, and we really need to get it back with an appellate body. Now, I think the atmosphere towards such a reform is a bit better now, and I think we have the American back on board, at least to start a proper discussion on that. So that is well noted. We hope that the roadmap is going to be launched at the end of this ministerial. But it is not only about the dispute settlement. There is also the negotiating function. And unfortunately, as I said, it is not even possible to talk about exploring the possibility of launching market access negotiation on services, so we're not yet there. So I think the reform will need also to restore this, if possible. And then you have a very important role into the current system, which is a notification system. And I think that one is something which is probably the easiest way to reform. To oblige countries to respect their obligation to notify anything related to international trade. And I think that would be probably the easiest way to find something, and I hope we will go there. That is because we want the multilateral trading system into place, and that is the reason why we want to have that in the WTO. Now, to respond to your second part of your questions, and going eventually on a plurilateral basis with open processes and therefore still in the WTO. As you know, countries like India and South Africa contest the legality of the plurilaterals. So already there we have a problem. And to make a second WTO on the side of the WTO, I don't think this is a way we would like to explore at this stage. If it is the only way to move on, why not? You know, we have the joint statement initiative on e-commerce. We have 86 countries. We have the Joint Statement Initiative on Services, Domestic Regulation, where actually today 3 new countries have joined. So that is making 70 countries or something like that. So this process go on, but the one on Services, Domestic Regulation is actually on an MFN basis. And therefore, whether they like it or not, it is part of the WTO, because it is just having additional commitment in the GATS commitment, schedule of commitment, and therefore for me it's totally within the WTO. So for me, the Services Regulation is not outside the WTO process, so it's part of the multilateral process. Now, going on to a plurilateral with other issues, we try to do that in the e-commerce, but you will always have the question of the critical mass.
Of course.
And that might be not problematic. So we would like first to try to reform the current system within the system.
But that would be the first best.
Yes.
Of course, of course. Last question to you, Pascal, is what are your views on what the private sector and civil society and even the academic community could do from the outside to support the multilateral system in the WTO. You're the head of a private sector organization in Europe. How do you see the role of the outsiders who want the system to function to support it?
Well, I mean, this is why I'm paid for, so I'm lobbying the government, I'm lobbying the European institutions. We are sending letters to all the government in the world that we think should listen to our views. So whether or not this is structured or not, we will do that. But I think all evidence show that when there is a structure, what I would call civil society dialogue, if you wish, allowing the input by all NGOs to be listened to and to bring forward in a welcome framework, I think that is making things much easier. We have seen that in the Seattle battle that was not the case. I think the WTO has been good enough by putting these public forums, allowing the civil society to express itself. I must say, this week we have been a bit disappointed with the way NGOs have been welcomed in the city, complicated access, and I don't think we can blame the pandemic anymore, so there are some adjustments which would need to be done here. But to come back to the question about the role of the civil society at large and the business organization in particular, we want to be able to express our views to the government about what we think. Certainly for the business, and my organization is dealing exclusively with international trade and services and investment, and therefore we consider of our legitimate purpose to bring our input to the government. If we have a framework like the WTO welcoming this, that makes things much easier. But for instance, the civil society dialogue in the European Union is well structured, and I think this week actually the European Commission is probably is the only body welcoming comments and making daily debriefings to the NGOs. So complicated.
Well, before we close off, what would be your parting thoughts regarding MC12 and the future of the system for our FMG audience? What message do you want to leave with us?
Save the WTO and therefore do not introduce tariff on services, because otherwise this organization will lose complete credibility toward the business community. We are probably among the only sectors which are still coming to Geneva to support the WTO. If the system is introducing tariff on services, it's a new paradigm shift, and that's going to be really, really disastrous for the World Trade and the World Trade Organization. So my plea is, to be able to continue, we need to avoid this catastrophe.
You're referring to the moratorium?
I do.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for making the time, Pascal. It's always a pleasure to see you, always a pleasure to hear your views, and for our audience, thank you very much, and until the next interview.
Thank you. Bye-bye.